Our reading this morning is an excerpt from See No Stranger, a memoir and manifesto of revolutionary love by Valerie Kaur. The call to love beyond our own flesh and blood is ancient. It echoes down to us on the lips of indigenous leaders, spiritual teachers, and social reformers through the centuries. Guru Nanak called us to see no stranger, Buddha to practice unending compassion, Abraham to open our tent to all, Jesus to love our neighbors, Muhammad to take in the orphan, Mirabai to love without limit. They all expanded the circle of who counts as one of us, and therefore who is worthy of our care and concern. These teachings were rooted in the linguistic, cultural, and spiritual context of their time, but they spoke of a common vision of our interconnectedness and interdependence. It is the ancient Sanskrit truth that we can look upon anyone or anything and say, Tatvam Asai, I am that. It is the African philosophy, Ubuntu, I am because you are. It is the Mayan precept in Lakesh, you are my other me. What has been an ancient spiritual truth is now increasingly verified by science. We are all invisibly part of one another. We share a common ancestry with everyone and everything alive on earth. The air we breathe contains atoms that have passed through the lungs of ancient ancestors long dead. Our bodies are composed of the same elements created deep inside the furnaces of long-dead stars. We can look upon the face of anyone or anything around us and say, as a moral declaration and a spiritual, cosmological, and biological fact, you are a part of me I do not yet know.
So I want you to imagine yourself in a social situation. Maybe you're at the office. Maybe you are having lunch with your friends. Maybe you're catching up with an old acquaintance. And they start talking about their weekend and what they're planning on doing. And they bring up this big event that their church is doing. Let's say it's a yard sale, right? And you happen to say to them, our congregation, our church just did a yard sale not too long ago, and it was so freaking successful. It was absolutely amazing. And your friend goes, I didn't know you went to church. You don't seem like a church type. Where do you go? Oh dear. You know where this conversation's going. I go to the Unitarian Universalist Church, and you know that that is not going to be enough of an answer for your friend, because their next question is, Unitarian Universalist? What's that? How do you answer that? Now, some folks may answer this by giving a statement or a series of statements of what we are not, right? We are non-creedal. We aren't necessarily Christian, and we don't believe in the Bible, but we don't not believe in the Bible. And maybe some will say, well, we have these 7 principles, and they will immediately pull this out of their purse, the 7 principles, and if you don't have it, maybe you'll look them up on your phone and show them to your friend, because how many of you have them memorized? Barb, thank you. Maybe you'll use terms like multi-faith to describe our denomination. Maybe you'll use the term pluralistic. Maybe you'll even say non-denominational. We're a denomination, folks. But in most cases, whatever answer you give, you know there's another question coming up right after it. Okay, so what do you believe? How do you answer that? Everything. We believe in everything. We believe in nothing. We believe that belief is a social construct made to exploit the working class. One of the challenges of our faith, our pluralistic, inquisitive, questioning faith, is that by its nature it is very hard to describe. So much so that the UUA published a curriculum in 2003 called Articulating Your Unitarian Universalist Faith. And it was made to help people answer these questions, and about 20 folks kind of knew I might be going here because they have signed up for my Articulating Your UU class that I am teaching right now. And if I've piqued your interest in this class, the class is full, I'm sorry. I'll be doing it again at some point in time. But what is interesting is that who is in this class runs the gamut from people who are relatively new and still learning about our faith to people who have been a part of our faith community for over a decade. And all of them are genuinely curious on how to answer that question. And all of them have a deep love, if not respect, for our faith. They know how this community makes them feel. They know that there is something beautiful there, but they just can't put the words to it. Now, some of you are probably thinking, well, I think the principles do a pretty good job putting words to it. And the principles, you may say, describe our faith. We believe in the principles. That's what we believe in. The principles are good. The principles are good. It is really hard to argue with what the principles are stating, right? It is really hard to argue that we shouldn't strive for the inherent worth and dignity of every person. We might not feel it at rush hour traffic, but we know we should strive for it, right? It's really hard to disagree with the idea of a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, especially in a world when we hear so much falsehood and lies. Do you know there are congregations who recite the principles every Sunday during their worship service? I know for the fact First Unitarian in Pittsburgh does this, right? And it's a wonderful idea if you think about it. Because the more you get familiar with these things, the more you're reminded about what good behavior can be. It is a promise that we make with these principles. How we aspire to behave with the outside world. Can you imagine what this world would be like if 7 billion people followed the principles? What would this world be like if everyone followed these principles? Oh my God, a whole lot better. Heaven on earth. They are a great guide. They have wonderful things to them. And they are not what we believe. How many of you know the history of the principles? Chris, can you show us the first slide? I've got this, I got to do a TED Talk here. These are the first draft, these are the first adopted principles from the newly minted UUA in 1961, when the Unitarians and the Universalists merged. And I want you to look. I'm about to say the numbers are cut off. How many principles are here? 6, not 7, 6. And how many of you know our first principle? Barb, what's our first principle? The inherent worth and dignity, right? Our first principle here is to strengthen one another in a free and disciplined search for truth as the foundation of our religious fellowship. That's not the first principle as we know it. No, the third one here, to affirm, defend, and promote the supreme worth of every human personality, the dignity of man, and the use of the democratic method in human relations. That's closer to what we know as the first principle. All right, what's wrong with that statement? Man. Oh my God. And did you see over here, they've got the word brotherhood in number 4? Oh my gosh. Do you think these principles could pass today? No? How about, which one is it? Number 2. Look at number 2. To cherish and spread universal truths taught by the great prophets and teachers of humanity in every age and tradition, immemorially summarized in the what? The what? Judeo-Christian. Would we say that today? Is that in our principles today? No, it is not. Gendered language, Christology, patriarchy, right? And only 6. We're missing one. Do you know when they changed to what they are now? Who knows the year? 84, 85, yes. And do you know what was the driving force behind that change? The women. Give yourself a hand, that's all right. That's all right, yeah. Do you think 40 years ago in 85, when these changes were proposed, were they passed unanimously or not? Yes, they were. Was there fighting before they passed unanimously? Yes, there was. It was not an easy pass. There's an old rule, don't call a vote till you know what the vote is. The UUA was very good about making sure everybody would vote yes before they called that vote, and it took a lot of work. And it took a lot of work. Do you know why we even have the principles? In 1961, we merged the Unitarians and the Universalists. They were not really thrilled about this idea, because what happens when 2 big, powerful groups merge? Who gets to be the dominant one? Who's the leader? They had arguments over whether it was going to be Unitarian Universalists or Universalist Unitarians. I kid you not. And we had a lot of fighting about what the faith should stand for, and they wanted to have a set of principles to go by. And when you have 2 groups who have a lot of differences, your set of commonalities is going to be what? Your lowest common denominator. They found principles that were wide enough to hold both Unitarianism and Universalism. And let me ask you this, the 7 principles we have now, are they wide enough to contain both Unitarianism and Universalism? Yes. I think those principles are wide enough to contain every single theology when practiced well. We don't count the extremists. And that's all the extremists, my friends. We have extremists on both sides of the theological spectrum. But what we have to remember is that these 6 principles are a container of what we believe. The 7 principles we have now are a container of what we believe. They are not the belief itself. And that is a hard distinction to make. So I'm going to try something here. Can we have the next slide, please? Where are my French speakers? What does that say in French? Translate it. This is not a pipe. How many of you are familiar with this image? Okay, you don't count. You don't count either. You're my son. I talked about this at dinner last night. I saw a few people who raised their hand about this. This is, pardon my pronunciation, René Magritte? Is that about right? A surrealist artist. And this is titled, what's the title of this picture? This is not a pipe. It's The Treachery of Images. What's this a picture of? It's a painting. Technically, it is a JPEG projected onto an LED screen that is embedded into a Google slide. It is not a painting. That's the point that the artist was making. The treachery of an image is we automatically associate the image with what it is projecting and not what it is itself. As Malcolm McLaren would say, the media is the message. But we're not going to go talk about that. The idea is the painting is the container. And he's pointing out what the container is. The message of the painting is the pipe. And it is hard sometimes for us to distinguish because we see that and the first thing we think is pipe, not painting. And it can be hard sometimes to make that distinction. The painting contains the idea of pipe, and in the same way, the principles contain the belief of Unitarian Universalism. They are not what we believe. They are not what our faith is about. Instead, they are an attempt to point us to what our faith truly is. The principles are a way for us to articulate our faith as we have learned through history. And there will be times when we need to re-examine what those words are to use to describe what the center of that faith is, what it is we all hold in common. And are we a faith of people who constantly re-examine ourselves? Yes, it is deep in our DNA. It only makes sense that as the world changes and as we change, the words we use to describe that ineffable center of our faith change as well. As some of you may know, we are in the process of that change as a denomination. In 2020, the UUA started a study commission to examine Article 2 of our national bylaws, which houses our purpose and our principles. And like any good UUA commission, they currently have a 26-page report about their findings over the last 2.5 years that you can find on the UUA website pretty easily. You Google Article 2 UUA, and you can find that PDF of that 26-page report. This year at General Assembly in 2023, there's going to be some discussing about it and discussing maybe amending what their proposal is so far. And in 2024's General Assembly, they will vote whether or not to adopt. Or should I say, we will vote whether or not to adopt. And the Commission recommends changing the 7 principles to 6 values rooted in love. And it wouldn't be a good UUA study without some kitschy little graphic. So we have our next slide with the graphic they have come up with. Can I just give you a personal side about this graphic? I love the idea behind it, but we have enough trouble being called the hippies and moon children, and to have a flower and what this study does is it takes what that center is and tries again to find new words to describe them, the 6 values that all come from love. And the values are justice, interdependence, equity, transformation, pluralism, and generosity. And I think, again, we can all agree that we agree with those values. Part of the idea behind this is, why do we have just 6 words? Well, how many of you have, aside from Barb Moore, how many of you have memorized the principles? 6 words is a little easier to memorize. And in the Commission report, they go into a little bit more depth about what they imagine these words mean. For example, the word transformation. This is what the commission says. Transformation. We adapt to a changing world. We covenant to collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically. Openness to change is fundamental to our Unitarian Universalist heritages, never complete, never perfect. Transformation. Another one, equity. We declare that every person has the right to flourish with inherent dignity and worthiness. We covenant to use our time, wisdom, attention, and money to build and sustain fully accessible and inclusive communities. One, you'll notice some very familiar language, inherent dignity and worthiness. Right? This whole grow and spiritually transform, very similar language. You'll also notice the covenant, very intentional in there, giving us some direction on what to do, right? What we declare, what we covenant to do with it. What we believe, what we vision, what we want to do with it. The language has changed a little bit. The graphic has changed a little bit. And the core, that core is still there. That same core that was there in 1961 when the Unitarians and the Universalists came together and came up with 6 principles that were a little rooted in patriarchy and were a little rooted in Judeo-Christian faith. That core is still there. The core that was in the 7 principles as they are today, that is still there. That core of unconditional love. That core of understanding that we are all connected. That core to, as our reading said, to see no stranger. To practice unending compassion, to open our tent to all, to love our neighbor, to take in the orphan, to live without limit, to love without limit. In this diagram, they try to suggest that core of love, by putting it literally in the center. And I'm going to be frank with you, folks, I don't like that. I don't like the word love in this, and let me tell you why. Love has lost its meaning, the word. It has become a poor container for what we believe, for what we all hold in common. It is thrown around so casually that it has lost its impact. I like better that core of what that reading spoke to this morning. That idea that to see everything and everyone and to say, I am that. That idea of Ubuntu, I am because you are, of you are my other me. That comes so much closer to what the core of our faith is, of what it calls us to do. All of these are noble and good attempts to try and name the center of our faith, what we believe in. And the thing about all of these words is that they are a painting and not the pipe itself. Because they're words. In seminary, I was told that theology is an action, not a belief. And I know there are going to be grammarians and English folks here who are going to want to talk to me after service about how that is an incorrect statement. And the truth of the sentiment, the truth of that sentence is that we can argue the semantics and the words, but they are telling us what we need to embody. It's never been about the words. We are not a people of words. It is about what we do. So when someone asks you, what do you use believe? I would suggest you tell them you can't answer that question. Because our faith, belief is different among all of our members. Truly, we may be called snowflakes, and in a way, they're right, because no two of us believe the same. However, we do all have the hope. We have the hope of a world that could be. We are the people who see the sacred and recognize it in each other. We see the possibility of that global community, and we realize that if we could get others to see it, that we could create something better. And in fact, truly, we believe that there is no other. We are one. Yes, as Unitarian Universalists, we love our words. But we need to remember that they are to be used to call us to our best selves and are not an end in and of themselves. No, we do not believe the same. But we do not need to in order to live into our best selves and to create the world that we all deserve. May it be so.